I'm guessing we're live. Yes, we are live. Sorry, guys. This is my first time introducing since we've gotten Twitch and YouTube up here. So I'm a little slow. So welcome, everyone. So glad you could be here. Welcome to Lurking for Legends. This is, as you know, a very live, as you can tell, video cast where we talk with people from all walks of the publishing industry. I'm Christy Stratus, one of your hosts. I'm a historical suspense and historical fantasy author. And I have my two awesome co-hosts here, Richard H. Stevens, who writes epic fantasy, and David M. Kelly, who writes science fiction. And tonight we have an awesome guest with us. We have Telma Rocha, and she is a historical fiction author and contemporary fiction. So, we're going to be talking about the differences of writing those two things. And of course, as you guys know, make sure you are participating in the chat, asking any questions you feel like asking, and, letting us know about your own works as well. So welcome, Telma. We're really happy to have you here.
Thank you, Christy. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for
Great.
having me.
And, we always start out with our guests telling us about themselves. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
So I live in just outside of Paris, in Brantford, Ontario, and married. I have two boys, two older boys, 19 and soon to be 25. I have two books out and one on the way. And I work as a systems analyst during the day. That's my full-time job. That's what brings in the money. Certainly not the writing. I do the writing for fun. It's my passion and my love. So, and when I'm not writing, I'm usually just hanging out with friends. I like barbecuing, having meals, enjoying the sun, that sort of thing. And reading, of course. Reading is a really, really big hobby of mine as well, in addition to writing.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
I had to ask you something right off the bat. I know that you said, of course, so many writers aren't doing this full time yet. A lot of people do it on the side. Most of us have to, of course. And you called it a hobby. And so I just wondered right off the bat whether if your books started really making enough money for you to live off of them, then would you not call it a hobby anymore? Or is it really it needs to be a hobby?
That's actually an interesting question. I love it so much. And I almost fear that if it ever did become a job, that I may not love it as much because then there would be pressure. So right now it's a very stress-free, writing for me is almost therapeutic in a sense. I write, based on how I'm feeling. A lot of the books that I write sort of reflect how I'm feeling at the time. And it's really stress-free. So I don't really know how to answer that. I mean, if my books took off and they started making enough money that I could actually live off of them, I probably wouldn't call it a hobby anymore at that point. But I would tread that lightly. I would be very careful about, saying, that this is what I'm going to do and this is how I'm going to make my living, because I certainly don't ever want it to become a stressful environment for me, because then I just won't want to write anymore.
Oh, I can understand that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of writers feel like that, at least a lot of writers in the same, boat as me, where, like they have a full-time job and, they kind of turn to writing as just a pastime and a way to, maybe express themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's most of us, especially us indie authors. I just wanted to, everyone probably doesn't know this. I met Telma, I think it was 2019, beginning of 2019, as a member of the Cambridge Authors.
Yeah, it would have actually been before that, Richard, because we met before the Angolan Girl came out. Okay. I was still in the process of writing that book when I joined Cambridge Authors.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so when we started going to the Badger, so I probably want to say maybe 2017, maybe 2018. Yeah,
it'd be 2018 and definitely 2018. So okay. It'd be February 2018. Anyway, and when you mentioned the Badger, that's a pub that the group actually meets at. So it's a lot of fun. So we get together beforehand and we have a dinner if people want to show up, and then we go upstairs and order drinks and talk about writing. And sometimes we have some awesome guests up there. But I wanted to talk briefly about the book that got you started. And you mentioned the Angola Girl. Correct me if I don't get this right. You were born in Angola, correct?
I was born in Angola. That is correct.
And your family immigrated to Canada in '76 to avoid the Civil War that erupted in 1974. And in the Angola Girl, you document this journey, which is actually, I guess it's from your grandmother's point of view, it's a story about your grandmother's life from childhood through the early stages of the war. Can you just tell us a little bit about this book? Because I know it's left a profound impact on my wife is she read it because we met you through the Cambridge authors, and she got your book and she really loved it. And we're not just saying that to hype you up here today. She really did enjoy it. So tell us a little bit about the Angola Girl, your first book.
Yeah, sure. So the Angolan Girl started off originally in my mind. It was going to be more of a war story. Um, there was a lot going on with the war, and I knew the stories growing up. My grandmother was always a storyteller, so she would always tell me these stories about their life in Canada and leading up to the war. So when I first set out to write that book, I really thought the focus was going to be around the war. And it wasn't until I started meeting with my grandmother. So she is 93 years old this year. She's still alive, and she's doing well. And I approached her with the idea about writing her life story. And she was absolutely thrilled. She was honored. And so her and I started meeting once a week at either Tim Hortons or Starbucks. Now, my grandmother doesn't speak a word of English. So she was relaying the story to me in Portuguese, and I had to translate it in English. So as she's telling me the story, I'm already taking notes, in my notebook, already translating it in English as we went along. And it probably took about 3 or 4 visits with her before I realized that her entire life just needed to be told. It wasn't just the part about the war. She's such an incredible woman. She is my inspiration. She has been my inspiration my entire life. And I really truly felt that she could be an inspiration for others as well. She went through things that most people couldn't even dream of going through. And she went through one after another, and she persevered and she came out stronger every time she went through one of these ordeals. And so initially when her and I started meeting, I wanted to get like a little bit of history around, her childhood, because I didn't want to start the book off in just a war setting. I wanted to give the readers a little bit of, history about her, because she's going to be the main character in the book. And I soon realized that her entire life just needed to be told, and it worked out really well, because the series of events that she went through, it all kind of led, one thing led to another sort of naturally, and it led to this progression and this build up. And then the war happens, and then that's the big climax, and then we have to flee. And so her life was one that, I mean, you have to read the book to really understand some of the things she's going through. I don't want to certainly give out any spoilers, but she is an amazing woman, and my hope in writing that was that she was going to be able to inspire others, with her courage and her faith.
That's very interesting. So I noticed your second novel, From Far and Wide, is set on Manitoulin Island.
It is,
which
yes.
is very interesting, because that's just down the road from me. So could you tell us a little bit about that and what inspired that novel?
Yeah, absolutely. So that novel is completely different. It is not historical, and it is not a true story. It is totally fiction, and it is more contemporary. And my husband and I went on a trip right after the Angolan Girl was written, and I was a passenger on the back of his motorcycle. So he rides, and I'm a passenger. And when you're a passenger on the back of the bike, you have all this time in the world, because I'm not having to focus or concentrate. I can just enjoy the scenery. And From Far and Wide actually came to me during the trip that we took to Manitoulin Island, and I literally wrote that story in my mind on the back of the bike. And the island it did something to me. It really just inspired me. It spoke to me in a way that I can't even explain. I fell in love with the island. I haven't been back since I wrote the book. I want to, and I'm sure I will someday. It's just COVID hit, and then it became harder to get out and things like that. But the island was just so mesmerizing and peaceful. And I think it opened up the floodgates for me, and my imagination just kind of went wild with it. And I came up with the whole story in my head. And then we went back to when we got to the hotel, the Queen's Inn, where we stayed, which is actually featured in the book as well. I quickly got out my phone and I started using the notepad on my phone in order to write down all the different like major plot beats that I had come up with in my head, because I didn't want to forget any of it. I didn't go prepared to write a book, so I didn't have like I didn't have a pen, I didn't have a notebook with me. So I used the notes on my phone in order to sort of just jot down all of the different ideas that I had, and then it evolved from there. And of course, it had to be set on Manitoulin because that was where I got my inspiration from. And
It's a beautiful place.
it's
certainly
yeah,
is.
absolutely beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Yeah,
A lot
and
of my
sorry, go ahead.
no, sorry, I'm not trying to cut you off. You go ahead.
A lot of people ask me, what is so special about Manitoulin Island? What do you do there? And I just say nothing. And I think that's the beauty of it. There really isn't much to do other than hike, sightsee, just go for a walk.
Fish, yeah.
Yeah, swim, fish, boat if you have a boat. I mean, there's not a whole lot as far as, like crazy nightlife. That's not why you go to Manitoulin Island. And I think that was what I really enjoyed about it at that point in time in my life. That is exactly what I needed.
Yeah, a lot of my family come from Gore Bay,
Yeah.
on Manitoulin Island, and I remember my father telling me when he was very young, he lived on a little island called Flower Pot Island, which is between Tobermory and Manitoulin.
Yeah.
And I know this is tough for Christy to envision because this is in Canada, but it's just on top of Lake Huron, just before it meets Lake Superior, kind of like it's in Georgian Bay. And he lived on Flower Pot Island, and there was no electricity out there. I remember him telling me the stories about they had no electricity because they were on this little rock in the middle of the bay. But
it's actually the world's biggest freshwater island.
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's mentioned in my book. There's a lot of like little, facts about the island in from far and wide. Just like little things from the experience that I had, and then the research that I did to like verify some of the facts and stuff. So yeah, I do mention that as well in the book. And I loved Manitoulin Island so much that I've actually considered writing another book set in Manitoulin Island. There's some authors have like there's this one author that I know, she's like one of the big huge she writes about Nantucket, and every book she ever writes it's set in Nantucket, and that it's summertime when this particular author releases her next book, and it's always set in Nantucket. And I've often thought about having kind of like a Manitoulin Island series, but not a series in the sense that the stories would follow each other. The books would be standalone, but they would all sort of be set on Manitoulin Island. And I've even considered, maybe even spin-offs. My sister gave me this idea one time about a spin-off for from Far and Wide, sort of continuing the story with maybe, the daughter years later or something like that. So, you never know. I've got a lot of ideas, a lot of books plotted that, may or, may not see the light of day at this point. I'm not really sure, but Manitoulin Island had such an impact on me that I've had that thought. Yeah, for sure.
So one of our viewers, Alexandra Marie, is asking, are you on Audible? She says you're a fantastic storyteller.
Oh, thank you. I am not on Audible, but I'm actually in the process of setting that up, of looking into that. So hopefully soon, my stories will be on Audible.
Oh, awesome. And just further to Alexandra, we also love seeing Christy back as well. We missed her on the show for sure. Oh, here's Tara Shipping Mondu. Hi, Telma and friends. Telma's an amazing speaker and a lovely person. She was a great storyteller. Glad to know her. So we were talking about the Cambridge Authors. Tara is one of the founding members of the Cambridge Authors. So it's nice to see that we have some support from our local group.
Yes, Tara's actually, I reached out to Tara years ago when I first started writing the Angolan Girl, because there's like a family connection there. And my husband's aunt told me about Tara, who'd written a book herself, and it was a true story, about her mother. And so I reached out to Tara at the time, and that's kind of how I became affiliated with Cambridge Authors. So yeah, I owe it all to Tara. She's wonderful as well.
Yeah, great book. She has a great book as well.
That's great. So, now I'm going to ask the question that all historical fiction authors are going to want to know. And that is, you've written contemporary fiction, you've written historical fiction, and the historical fiction is actually, now I know, based on your grandmother's story, right? Which is so cool. And, that's consisted of I mean, we could formally call them interviews. Obviously, you're chatting with her, since you're related to her, but, in a way, you're kind of interviewing her and taking her story and making it into a book. So, tell us a little bit about the different writing process you're going through when you have somebody's story that you're translating into like a fictional account versus something just brand new that you have come up with yourself.
It's a totally different process, completely different, and it's really difficult to say which one is more difficult because they each have their own challenges and their own positives. When I was writing The Angolan Girl, the challenges that I faced with writing that book was that one challenge, my grandmother didn't know English. So when she's explaining something to me in Portuguese, a lot of times I had no idea what she was talking about. I didn't know she'd use a word or something. I'd say, well, what does that mean? So then I'd have to go and ask my aunt, who is fluent in both English and Portuguese. Well, what does grandma mean by this? So there was some translation, issues that we had to work out. Those were some of the minor things. On a larger scale, the one difficulty I had was the plot is what the plot is because the story it's happened. It's a story that has occurred, and so I can't just make things up in order to fit a traditional storytelling structure, per se, right? Now, I got lucky with The Angolan Girl because my grandmother's story sort of in itself just kind of blended itself well to, a story, which is why I decided to write it more like a story versus like a memoir or an autobiography. It's actually categorized, even though it's a true story, you'll find it at Indigo on the shelf under fiction. So you won't find it under nonfiction. And I chose to do that because I thought that it would maybe appeal to a wider audience because not a lot of people will read nonfiction. It's specific to, one audience. And I felt like I would probably, have a greater audience if I categorized it as fiction. And the story, I tried really hard to stay true to the story, how it happened, as best as possible. My grandmother's telling the story. She was, when a lot of this happened, it started off with her as a young little girl. Her youngest memory was when she was 6. And that's when sort of like when the story starts. Her storytelling didn't really have a lot of emotion because to her, this is, 80 something years later, right? She's past that, so she didn't have a lot of emotion. She's just sort of telling me the facts. This is how it was, so I really struggled with injecting, making sure that the emotion came through in the story, that the reader would really get the gist of what she really went through at that time during that specific crisis or situation. So I would ask her, pointed questions, in terms of, how did you feel and how did you react? Can you explain that to me? To try to capture the essence of the story as true as possible. Writing contemporary, you have a lot more leeway. I mean, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So from Far and Wide, I felt like the doors were just wide open to me. I didn't have to conform to any, predetermined plot. I could create a character if I needed more conflict in a scene. I could kill someone off if I decided, what, I just really want to kill that character off because I think it's going to be a good twist. I could do whatever I wanted. And so there's a lot more freedom, I think, with writing something that is not a true story, and specifically contemporary. I found it easier because I live in today. I'm experiencing life today, which is the time period in which From Far and Wide is written. With The Angolan Girl, I couldn't write about a tree without Googling, like, well, what did trees look like in Angola back in, like the early 1900s? Like I had no idea. I was 2 years old when we left Angola, during the Civil War. So I have absolutely no memories of Angola whatsoever. So those things were difficult. Getting the facts right. Like I remember, my aunt was a huge help to me in, she was a beta reader, so she did a lot of like the fact checking. And I remember one time she was reading one paragraph, and I was describing, there was a war scene, and my family was hiding, and I had in the book, we were hiding in the basement because when my grandmother said we went to go seek refuge in the house, I just naturally in my mind assumed, well, if that were me, I would go to my basement. That would be like, there's a tornado coming, you run to your basement, right?
Mhm.
And then my aunt someone who pointed out that, like, well, there's no basements in the houses in Angola, right? Like that back in that time, that just wasn't a thing, right? So I'm like, oh, okay, well, I didn't even realize that, So it's those factual things that I think I really struggled with.
Mm.
Street names, I wanted to be as accurate as possible. Whereas with From Far and Wide, I mean, yes, I do reference street names and things like that, like of actual places. But you know what? At the end of the day, From Far and Wide is completely fictional. So, if I messed it up, it's still fictional, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing that says that I had to use the actual street name or spell it the way it's really spelled. Maybe I purposely spelt it, differently so that there would be a difference. You know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
those were some of the biggest challenges. Character profiles is another difference. I don't have to. Oh, hi, Aunt Rose. That's my aunt who joined.
Welcome to the show.
Hi, Rosa.
Another difference, between writing a true story and writing a fictional story is characters. So with From Far and Wide, I had character profiles for all of my characters, and I had to kind of figure out, well, what do I want my characters to, what do I want them to believe in, what do I want them to do, what do I want them to like, with the Angolan Girl, I did have character profiles, but it was different. They were almost predetermined for me. Because again, like I said, I try to stick to the reality as much as possible. And so if I'm describing a certain person, I'm trying to use the real life characteristics for that person, as opposed to having to create everything myself. So definitely a lot more work, I think, when you're writing fictional, because you have to create everything, but you have so much more freedom with the piece that you create as well, right? So that's why I said I can't really say which one is more difficult, because they both have their challenges and they both have their positives.
Yeah,
For
I
sure.
can see that.
Yeah. That's why I write fantasy. I can make up whatever I want.
You can, yeah, and that's a whole other, yeah. I actually have a fantasy story plotted.
Right.
It was supposed to be a 3-part book. I don't think I'll ever write it. I
Oh, come on.
just feel like I've
I'll
kind
convert
of
you.
found my niche, with contemporary. I might go back and write historical. I love historical fiction. I love to read historical fiction, so I may write another historical fiction novel someday. It probably won't be based off of a true story. It'll be, fictional. But I don't know that I'll ever do anything with the fantasy books, because I just feel like that's a lot. Kudos to you, because
Oh,
fantasy
come
to
on. We
me,
have dragons.
oh, you've really got it. You've got to develop not only the plot and the characters, you've got to develop an entire world.
Oh, I just make it up. You don't have to develop nothing. And hope they don't call you out on it. I think it's wonderful that your aunt's here, and with her here, you also have your books translated into Portuguese, and how cool is that? I've always thought about translating my books into different languages as well, especially German, because Germany is supposed to be a great audience. What were some of the hurdles you faced in doing so? Because I imagine Portuguese, like any other language, they don't quite translate the same as the English language, or vice versa.
So I don't even know how this happened. I'm a true believer that things happen for a reason. You put something out into the universe, and it just if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. Because writing the Angolan Girl, my biggest wish was to have it available in Portuguese, because my grandmother is Portuguese, and I wanted her to be able to read the book. And my goal was eventually to do that. I looked into it. It was going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars. Like, I'm talking to the tune of 20 grand. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a long time before I get enough royalties to come up with that kind of money to translate my book. And then there's this woman, a lovely, lovely, lovely woman. Her name is Rhonda Forrest. She's a writer out in Australia, and her and I got to know her through Instagram, through my book account on Instagram. She reached out to me when I was writing the Angolan Girl, because I had made an early post about, just writing it and being a little nervous and not sure. And she reached out to me and offered help. She basically just said, I'm a writer of historical fiction and contemporary fiction, if you have any questions. And she ended up helping me tremendously. She ended up, I would send her early chapters, and she would edit them for me, provide me with feedback. And her and I became really good friends. We've never met. 4 years later, she sends me a message one day telling me that there is this Portuguese publisher in Brazil that had just acquired one of her books. She'd submitted it to this publisher, and they were a fairly new publisher. And she said, I know that you want to get your book translated into Portuguese. She says, you should submit your story to them and see if they'll buy it, right? So I thought, what are the chances? I did, and they took it. They wanted it, so they purchased the Portuguese rights to the book. So I got the book translated in Portuguese, and I did not have to pay a dime. So they are a traditional publisher.
Nice.
So
Wow.
yeah. So while the Canadian books are published through my own publishing company, the Portuguese books are published through this traditional publisher, and then they also picked up from far and wide as well, and it's also available in Portuguese. So that's how that came about. And I mean, you know, when I think back, I honestly thought at one point, I thought, oh, this is going to be impossible. I'm never going to be able to find a publisher who is going to want my book and put in the work that's required in order to translate the 9,500,000 words book into another language. I mean, that's a lot of work. I know what it takes because I wrote the book. So, and translating sometimes is probably even harder, I would think, right? To make it, to keep it accurate, and then they've got to edit it. So they did everything. They do the translation, the editing, the cover design, and they were so good with the cover. I was so worried because I really wanted my grandmother's photo to be on the cover. And ultimately, they are the publisher. They buy the rights. They could have done whatever they wanted. And they asked me for her photo, and I was just so thrilled when they did that. So they used her photo on the cover, and I think they did a lovely job. So that's how that came about.
Awesome.
I don't know where I would be with it if I had to do it on my own. It probably still wouldn't be available in Portuguese. So yeah, so I have the publisher to thank for that.
So have you been able to read it?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, Christy. Have you been able to read it? Like, are you can read Portuguese?
Yeah, I can read Portuguese, a little. Like I can, because it's my own book and I know the story, I can read it probably better than if I was to pick up like a regular Portuguese book.
Right. So the translation then, did they do it justice? Like, it's hard to
I think so. So the publisher is in Brazil. So, and there is like a little bit of a difference with, the language between, Portugal and Brazil. But I think they did a good job from what I know. I'm just thrilled that it is, close enough. if that, I mean, they remained true to the story. They I signed a contract that had them a promise that they weren't going to change anything, because that was another worry. And so they put it right in the publishing contract for me that they were not going to change the story. What they may change, what they had to end up changing was things to make the translation come across, because when you translate something from one language to another, like if you do like a direct translation, it sometimes doesn't come through the same way. So things like that they would have had to have changed to get the point across, or the emphasis across, but yeah, I got really, really lucky with that process. Yeah, really lucky.
So I noticed on your latest book, which is out on pre-order now, I believe.
Yes.
And you're donating your pre-orders to the Ukraine humanitarian appeal. So could you tell us a little bit about the new book and why you decided to go that route, which is such a generous thing to do?
Yeah, for sure. So I always wanted to do something. I wanted to use my platform on Instagram to try to help in some way. And I started seeing posts lately from different, we call them like bookstagrammers, when it's like an Instagram account specifically dedicated to books. And I started seeing a lot of book posts that people were making, where they were featuring, like the Ukrainian colors, so stacks of books and the colors, and they would basically say, for every comment that is left on this post, the creator of the post will donate $1 to Ukraine in some form. So I started seeing that a lot. And I thought that's a really good idea, and I participated in a few of them. Like would constantly comment on those posts to try to help the creator to generate, more donations. And so I was going to initially do that. And then it just kind of worked out that 28 years was just at the point where I was ready to set the release date. And the idea just kind of came to me, and I'm not really sure how. I just kind of thought, well, I don't do this for the money. I have a full-time job. Writing for me, like we talked about earlier before, it really is just a passion and a hobby of mine. I don't do it for the money. So I decided at that point that I wanted to use my pre-order royalties to help. And so the company that I work for, Texas, the software company, they had an initiative that, and I think maybe this is maybe what kind of got me thinking about doing this, was they had sent the HR directors had sent an email out to all employees saying that if any employee participated in any sort of fundraiser towards Ukraine, that the company would contribute up to $200 for each employee's fundraising campaign.
Nice.
So when I saw that email,
nice.
I thought, okay, I got to get on that. I definitely have to do something.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of solidified my decision to say, okay, I'm going to do it. It's going to be my pre-order royalties that I'm going to donate. And so the company will be contributing $200 as well towards it. So I started pre-orders. I believe the pre-orders went up the first week of May, I think, was when I first announced the pre-orders. So I've been collecting pre-orders since then. So it hasn't been quite a month yet, probably about 3 weeks. And the book comes out on June 24th. So I'm basically going to let it run right up until a release day, and then at the point of release day, then what I'll do is I'll log in. I don't know how many pre-orders I've accumulated yet. Ingram Spark, the distributor, I love them, but the reports that they have aren't the greatest. So like I literally have to wait a month. So pre-orders that were collected in May will be reported to me, I'm hoping now, the first week of June. So they say they're always kind of like a month behind. So I should know, by next week how many pre-orders I have for May. And then in July, I'll know how many pre-orders I had for June. So then I'll know like the total, and then I'll be able to figure out like how much I've accumulated and send off the check. But I'm going to let it run right up until the pre-order day, and probably even till the end of the month, because I'm thinking it's going to be easier to figure out what were the total sales for the month of June, as opposed to try to figure out the cutoff of the 24th. So I'll probably let it run right up until the end of June. And so we'll have 2 months worth of calculating pre-orders, and we'll see what we can do. And then I will be donating it to the humanitarian appeal through Red Cross for Ukraine.
Awesome.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So I feel good about doing that. I feel lucky that I'm in a position that I can do that. So I don't, like I said, I don't do it for the money. So I'm lucky in that sense that I'm able to do this. And the story itself, 28 Years, is another contemporary book. It is fictional, all fictional. And interesting enough, this is a story that I actually started writing way back before I even had kids. So my oldest boy is going to be 25. So I started writing this book a long, long time ago. And I got to a point with it where have you ever heard the term of Impostor Syndrome?
Yeah.
So
we live it.
Yeah. So Impostor Syndrome at that point really kicked in. And I thought, who the heck am I to think that I can write a book? Like, this is just ridiculous. This is crazy, And I completely just scrapped it. I thought, you know what? Just stick to reading. You're better at reading than writing. And I forgot about the book. It sat on my laptop, like one of my really old laptops, and then I'd get a new laptop years later, and I'd be like, I'm going to take that story and I'm going to put it on a thumbnail, and I'm going to put it over onto the new computer just in case, who knows. And then I remember the point where I actually deleted it. I actually deleted the file. I said, you know what? This is never going to materialize in anything. I'm never going to finish this. And I deleted it. It was completely gone. And it stuck with me. The story stuck with me. And then I was working out with a really good friend of mine. We were in my gym working out, and she started telling me about a story that had not a similar plot line, but there were some similarities. And she got me thinking about the story that I started writing all those years ago. And I thought, maybe there was something there, because mine's got a bit of a twist to it. It's not the traditional, and I don't want to give away any spoilers, but it's not the traditional story that you would think it's about, what that particular subject matter is about. Mine has a little bit of a twist. So, it's told from a different perspective. And so I thought, maybe there's something there. And so I started revisiting it, and I started rewriting it. Now it's changed quite a bit compared to when I first started writing it. It's changed. It's probably a totally different book. So I don't regret deleting the original manuscript. In fact, I'm kind of glad that I did, because if I still had that old manuscript, I probably wouldn't have continued with the story, because I was writing that at a time when I was not, a very I didn't know what I was doing. I had never written anything before. No one had looked at it. It was very, very rough draft, and I didn't know about the things about writing that I know today. So it was absolutely riddled with all of the things that you are not supposed to do that identify you as a novice writer. That draft would have definitely had all of those things, and it probably would have scared me off. So I'm glad in a way that I didn't have that original manuscript anymore, because what it really allowed me to do was just take the story that I still had in my head and start from scratch and write it smarter, because I find with every book that I write, my drafts are smarter. I'm writing smarter. The Angolan Girl first draft was a complete mess, because it was all about just get the story out and worry about editing later. And then from Far and Wide, I found my first draft was already better than, the last book. And now with this third book, my first draft is yet even better than the last two, because you get smarter, as you write. You start learning about the things that you had to go back and fix that took you hours and hours. So you start doing that right off the bat, as opposed to just, worrying about it later. So I have no regrets about deleting that manuscript. It's long gone from my life, and that's okay, because I'm really proud of 28 years. It's a story that I think will. It's a little bit more. It's not From Far and Wide is a sad story. It is a heart wrenching. You'll probably cry. A lot of my readers who read it say that they shed tears reading it. It is meant to move you. That's the intention. If you read it and you don't cry, then I don't know. Maybe I haven't done my job. So everyone tells me that they had to have some tissue handy. So I think, okay, well that was the intention. 28 years is a little lighter. I mean, it still has a lot of the same themes that you see in family dramas, but it's not as sad. It's a little bit lighter, and I think that reflects sort of like where I was too when I wrote the story. When I wrote From Far and Wide, that was the mood I was in, and it came out in that story that way. With 28 years, I was in a different mood, and so the story came out the way it did. And the one I'm writing now is yet different because of the mood that I'm in now. So I think the mood that I'm in currently really does play a big factor in sort of the output that I put out there in my books.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I have 2.5 books that I wrote that will never see the light of day.
How many?
2.5 novels.
2.5. Oh.
And they'll never see the light of day because they're absolutely terrible. It was like while I was learning how to write, but
yeah.
It's like, but I didn't delete the files. I still got them.
Well, the reason I deleted the files was imposter syndrome. I got to a point where I just did not believe in myself. I didn't believe in the story. I didn't have the confidence. Mm-hmm. And I just, I gave up, and I decided, what's the point of, I just keep passing this from computer to computer. Every time I get a new laptop, I keep bringing the file over and I never do nothing with it. So it's got to go, but it's okay. It all works out. And 28 years, I think, is, compared to the original draft, a much better story. It's much more solid. Mm-hmm. The characters are much more solid. The structure is much more solid. So I'm, no regrets there at all. But yeah, imposter syndrome, oh boy, I tell you that sometimes when that kicks in, it can really beat you down.
So based on your experience, then, do you have any kind of advice for writers who have imposter syndrome?
reach out to other writers. I found that really helps me. The Cambridge Writers Group really helped me a lot when I first joined. You know, I got to hear some similar stories with other people, you know, struggling with, you know, not necessarily the same issues, but, you know, just issues in general. And it makes you realize that you're not alone and that the feelings that you have are really normal. And imposter syndrome can really look differently for everybody, and it can sometimes, you know, rear its ugly head when you're not even expecting it. Like, I have some days, believe it or not, where I wake up in the morning and I think, I feel good, today is a good day, I'm feeling good and happy, and, you know, I've got all these plans, and then by lunchtime I'm like, oh, what am I doing? Do I even know what I'm doing? Like, it's just it's crazy how sometimes it can just creep in without you even realizing it. And
Yeah.
you know, the advice that I would give is just find other writers that you can talk to, that you can connect to, that you can share your story with, and have somebody else read your work and provide feedback. You know, feedback is so valuable, you know, because it'll help you grow as a writer. It'll help your story to be better, and it'll give you more confidence, which then in turn, I think if you have more confidence in general on a daily basis, you can then beat the imposter syndrome, you know, more often, or at least you're better equipped to tackle that imposter syndrome. But yeah, imposter syndrome is something that I hear that a lot of people struggle with, a lot of writers struggle with.
Yeah, for sure.
Unfortunately. Yeah, and that's why writing groups are so imperative and so important to writers, because writing is such a lonely thing, right?
Yeah.
Such a solitary, you know, hobby, or just you're by yourself. And so if you can engage other writers and, you know, meet up with other writers, and now that COVID's done, I'm hoping to maybe you know, our group, I'm really hoping that our group can start meeting in person again. I know we do like the monthly virtual chats and stuff, and those are great, but sometimes it doesn't beat that, you know, just in person. Yeah, that in-person connection.
Personally speaking, I find that I come across that usually around about halfway through whatever book I'm working on. It's like I get to the sort of round about the halfway point, and then up to that point I've been fine, and then suddenly it's like I start thinking to myself, my God, this is crap. What am I writing?
So
Why
it's the
am I
muddy,
writing this?
muddy middle. Is that the muddy middle?
And
Yeah.
it's
So
like,
they call it the muddy middle for a reason, right?
yeah, and it's like that. Every single book I've written, it's like I've got to that point, and I'm just suddenly thinking to myself, what the hell am I doing? You know, and it's like, yeah,
that's so true. I'm writing my 14th book, and I still experience that for sure.
Yeah. I think that if you are, now I am what you call a plotter versus a prancer. So a plotter is someone who writes a book knowing the start, the middle, the end, and all the major plot beats, and all the character profiles are defined, and I sort of know where I'm going. And a prancer would be someone who just kind of figures it out as they go. Are you a prancer, Richard?
Oh yeah,
you're all prancers. Okay.
Very
So
much.
I think that because I'm a plotter, I feel like I would probably have a worse time if I was a prancer, because then I'd get to a point where I'd be like, well, where do I want to go with my story next? Like, I have no idea. Whereas, you know, at least
That's
with
the fun of it.
that's the fun of it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah.
See, for me, I like the plotting aspect of it is where I get like I have the fun, because I can, you know, during the plotting phase, figure out what I want my characters to do, or not do, or, you know, what crisis do I want to include in there, you know. So for me, that's kind of like the fun part, and it changes too, you know, as I'm writing. I don't always just stick to my plot. Sometimes an idea will come to me, and I'll run with it, and it'll be totally different from what I had on the original plot, but that's okay, you know.
Yeah.
The third of those 3 unpublished novels, that was my attempt at actually plotting, and I plotted everything in detail and spent ages working out the plot, and then started writing the book and got about halfway through, and it's like, and I just didn't want to write it because I'd already worked out what all the story was. So it was kind of like there was no interest to me anymore.
You lose interest. That's interesting. I never thought of it that way. That's very, very interesting.
It was kind of like trying to chew, you know, secondhand chewing gum.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting.
I'll take your word for it, Dave.
Yeah. No kidding.
I think our guest last week, I think she mentioned that being a pantser, she had reviews from some of her readers saying, "Oh, this is another great plot twist by Sarah Cades, and she said, I had no idea that was going to happen. It's just my characters did that to me, and so being a pantser, you have no idea what's coming next, so it's kind of cool.
Yeah, characters have a tendency of sometimes just going rogue.
Oh yeah,
right? Yeah, it's like
I had one jump right off a bridge. And, that totally changed the outcome of the book because he was supposed to be integral to the outcome of the book, and he was not around after that. So,
that's hilarious.
That wasn't good.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, Telma, I see we're past our time to close down. We really appreciate you stepping in. We did have another guest that was supposed to be here this week, and she couldn't make it. She had a new job come up, and that's fine. Life gets in the way. But we appreciate you jumping in and filling in the gap. I know you were scheduled later on in the summer, I think in July.
End of July, yeah. Nope, this worked out perfect, yeah. So I'm really glad that I came on. I had a lot of fun. It was great. And, nice to meet you, Christy, and nice to see you again, David. And I'm sorry I didn't remember that we had met before.
Oh, don't worry.
I try to forget Dave too sometimes.
Most people do,
yeah. I think I speak for all of us when we love the enthusiasm that you have in your voice and the way you talk about your books and everything else. You can tell you really love what you do. And so, maybe there's something to it that not having the pressure of trying to make money writing your book adds a lot to your story. So I know my wife really loved the first book, and she's definitely going to get the next two. So we look forward to writing you a review for those. So again, for anyone who missed it, 28 Years is Telma's third book, and it's set to release on June 24th. It's up for pre-order. And as mentioned earlier, all of the pre-order royalties will be donated to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal to the Red Cross, and that's very commendable. Thank you for doing that. It's certainly
my pleasure.
Certainly a worthwhile cause. So before we leave you with Telma, where can people find your books if they're looking for you?
They can find my books anywhere books are sold. They are available in some of the local chapters, Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo. I know they have them physically in the store. You can get them online at any Indigo chapters. They're available at Barnes & Nobles. They're available on Amazon. So pretty much anywhere books are sold. They're distributed through Ingram Sparks. So Ingram's distributes to like something crazy like 30,000 retailers. So they're really available anywhere.
Awesome. Again, thank you for being on our show, Telma.
Thank you for having me. Have a great night.
Oh, we're still, we got a couple more things to talk
okay.
about. So we're going to add you for just a minute longer. So, Christy, what's happening in the Christy stratosphere?
All right. Well, let's have a rundown. Not like a ton or anything. I think tonight my newsletter is going to be going out. So if you're not already signed up for it, definitely sign up. You can find it on my website, christystratus.com. And I always have a lot of different sections in there. A lot of fun. Forgotten old movies, ambiance of the month, writing updates, all kinds of stuff. And aside from that, I have been writing the second in the Grimoire Society's series. So I'm like, like 2,400 words or something along those lines into the first episode. And I'm trying real hard to make these episodes shorter just to see if, people like that. It seems like maybe since this is a serial, it would be great if they were a little bit shorter. And boy, these characters just keep going. So we're going to see how long it ends up going. But I'm having a great time writing it. It's starting out just as exciting as the first one. So, that's where that's at. And I'm about to start working with a cover designer for the paperback and full ebook of Grimoire Society of Dark Acts, the first book in the Grimoire Society's series. So that is pretty much what I've been doing this week. Yeah.
Exciting working with a cover designer. It's always a fun part of the process.
It is. And it's so funny because you always have something particular in mind, and it either ends up totally different or it ends up like in a whole other way than you imagined, but better, like than you could have had in your head. It's an amazing process.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, and also, can you message me later with your newsletter link? I don't think I have your newsletter, so I'll have to get on that. Yeah.
Richard. Yes.
Yeah, I will. I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't believe that. It's been how long? Anyway, Dave, what's happening in the David Kelly universe?
So I'm pretty much on a build to the release of the second Logan Two Feathers book, called Ancient Dawn. So that's coming out on the 7th. And apart from that, I'm working on the third book in the series. And I've been going through that phase where I was saying I'm kind of like halfway through the book, and I've kind of been thinking, what the hell am I doing? Where the hell is this going, etc. And but as it happened, in amongst all my personal kind of like, trials and tribulations over the last kind of week, it's like last night I went to sleep, had a dream. I now know how the book finishes.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
So it's back on track.
Oh, that's great. So with me, I'm still working on Windwalker, but the ending is coming together. I just spent all day, most of yesterday, putting the last few chapters. And to say I'm just purely a pantser, I'm lying to you now, because I've got 14 books in, and there's so much lore and everything else in my universe that I need to start having notes and stuff. So I do keep a storyline on the side, and I use that to organize, especially the last couple of chapters, because I have so many story arcs that need to come together and happen at the same time at the end of the book, and it has to make sense. So I put all that together yesterday, and it's come along quite nicely. So that Windwalker should be done very shortly. It's probably going to be more than 150,000 words. So it's going to be my biggest book yet. And Saturday this week, on June 4th, I'll be in Elmira selling my books at the Robin and the Hood Festival. So anyone from Ontario will know where that is. This is the first time I've done this show, so I'm very excited to be out there again. And on Sunday, the following day, Lauren and I, and Caroline, of course, will be heading down the highway to sell and sign books at the Stratford Comic Con. It's put on by Pop Culture Canada, and they do all these smaller Comic Cons at all these little venues, but they're really fun. And it'll be held inside the Arden Park Hotel. So if you're in the area and you want to pop in, come in and say hi to Lauren and I. Lauren will have a new book out shortly. And Laura and I are attending as guest authors of the show, which is really cool. So we don't have to pay anything. We just have to show up. So I promise it to be a busy weekend for us. Anyway, next week on Lurking for Legends, it's our monthly live read, and I always look forward to these. On June 7th, historical fantasy authors Anita Stewart, Lindsay Pogue, and our very own Christy Stratos are going to read excerpts from one of their novels. And with the help of David and I wonder what kind of shenanigans Dave will get up to next week. I know my personal goal is to make Christy laugh at least once.
Always your goal.
They're a lot of fun. So please join us next week and enjoy a taste of their wonderful stories. And did you try to put your hand up there, Dave? Is that what you're doing?
No, I was just...
Oh, I thought you were putting your hand up. So anyway, for Christy, Dave, and I, we thank you, Telma, once again for joining us and sharing your wonderful journey. A lot of guest viewers here, and they really enjoyed hearing about it. So here's
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're most welcome. And here's to great success for going forward with your books. And I hope you do start making a lot of money on them and still enjoy writing them. So
thank you.
Until we meet again, everybody, take good care.
Good night.
Good night.